Hey, it's Mazzy, and it's the Music Stupid number 32. I hope you're still smiling. I'll leave it at that. I love to share music from my collection, and that's pretty much why I have this channel here. Occasionally, obviously, there are new releases that come into the library here. This segment, obviously, if you've been following, 5 records that I pulled that I just been listening to. These are records that I pulled last night that I listened to well into the evening and starting this morning too. And I realized sometimes there's a feeling, and sometimes there's a connection between the records I pull, and sometimes they're totally different, which is basically like life. It either goes in a linear way, or it's disjointed and it takes different paths. I realize there's several sort of singer-songwriter albums here, plus one an archive issue that kind of leads the groundwork for a big change in the group into a bigger group, and you'll see that when it gets to the end. So these 5 records, obviously, are records I enjoy and I want to share. Some of you know these, and some may be new to you. Now, this is an album that is now 20 years old, and this is Josh Rouse's 1972. I believe this is his 3rd or 4th album. He's an American singer-songwriter. He has a very easygoing style, very kind of folk-based, little more produced. And what's really wonderful about this record, this is the first record of his that I latched onto. And after this, I think he made one more here, and then he moved to Spain, and he started his career just kind of veered into several different directions of still a personal songwriting. But he was born in 1972, so he wanted to do this album of music, of the sound of music and the writing style of music that came out in 1972, at least around the early 70s. So think Tapestry and James Taylor, Carly Simon, and all those singer-songwriters, America, that type of kind of easy light. And when I say the word light, I don't mean less effective or sappy in any way, but there is a lightness to this record. 1972, it opens up with a slow opening number. And harking back to that, that's when I turned 18 years old, and I was all in on, the Neil Youngs and the James Taylors and those singer-songwriters, Elton Johns. Not that this sounds like those artists, but the production style, the instrumentation sounds like some of those records. I would say especially the West Coast, maybe the West Coast and the Boston East Coast sound that was happening in upstate New York at the time as well. An extension of the new folk scene from the 60s into the early 70s. Love Vibration, Sunshine, Sunshine, Come On Lady, that song. Now, another record that it harks back to, if you know Jonathan Edwards' song, Sunshine. Not that this sounds like that. It's not a derivative in that way, but it's a major influence. And I think it was kind of cool that he made this record based on the music he likes and also where he comes from. So this was originally released on CD. I did have the CD for many years on Royco disc, and this is Yep Rock put this out some years ago. It comes in and out of print, but it's really a great record. I have 2 records. I think there's an album he did after this called Nashville, which is great. And I think he lived in Nashville for a while, as I recall. So he has that kind of singer-songwriter thing going, but very, very good album. Next is an album. This is the 5th album and final album, I believe, under maybe the second to the last album under this name. The proper, well, let's get into it. This is the Red House Painters. Another band that relocated and really started their existence in San Francisco, although they were from Atlanta. They started out, the nucleus of Red House Painters was from Atlanta. And Mark Kozelek is a primary vocalist and songwriter. And I used to see them around a lot in San Francisco, probably 5, 6, 7 times. And what I always liked about them, they had a really unique sound. They were like the slowest band. You think sometimes the Velvet Underground can be slow and dark and moody. Right off the top, I can't think of any bands that are slower. Nick Cave, no, he can get wild. And a lot of their songs are drawn out, long guitar pieces, and I'm all in on all their records. This record, the record company almost didn't put out, and they were on 4AD, and they were eventually dropped from 4AD, and apparently the rumor goes 4AD made a mistake, but they dropped and they went to a major label, supposedly. I think it was a Warner Brothers, and they didn't do anything. Mark Kozelek went on to a solo career, and then Sun Kill Moon. Almost Famous, he plays the bass player in that film. Very small part, not a lot of dialogue for him, but he's in that movie. This was essentially created as a Mark Kozelek solo album. He's the only member of the original Red House Painters that's on Songs for a Blue Guitar. I had the CD literally for years, and I remember one day playing this, and I had listened to it, but I just would always put it on in the background because I liked the mood of this record. It wasn't a record I sat in a sweet spot and really paid attention to. And all of a sudden, I was doing something, and I started hearing the lyrics for the first time of one particular song. And I had listened to this record for a year, maybe 20 times, and I realized it was Silly Love Songs by Paul McCartney. I didn't recognize it. It's a long 10 or so minute jam where he sings really slow. The lyrics, they're almost disjointed. They're almost just coming from another place and not in your face like Wings' version of it in 1976 or so. But a really good version. There's more electric guitar on here, a lot of electric guitar, but if noisy and quiet can be the same. You know how Neil Young can sometimes be really loud and obnoxious when he plays with Crazy Horse and loud, and sometimes he can have that subtlety and that low volume still being very electric and very ragged. And that's a little like Mark Kozelek on this album. There's also a version on here that he really twists around, and that's Long Distance Runaround, the Yes song. But most of the songs are original Song for the Blue Guitar, Make Like a Prayer, Priest Alley song. This came out at Universal Music through Island Records some years ago on vinyl. I don't know if it's available right now, but this is a wonderful record. I'm all in on all their records. There was a box set that came out some years ago on gold vinyl, and considering it's gold vinyl, actually sounds pretty good. But a big fan of that record and all their records. Now a person that everyone knows, and a lot of people don't seem to have heard this record, unfortunately, and this is Paul Simon's So Beautiful, So What. This is a reunion with the producer Phil Ramone, who worked with him before and worked with Simon and Garfunkel, and it's an amazing sounding record. The whole influence of this record, he split up with Warner Brothers after 30 years with Warner Brothers after his Columbia years with Simon and Garfunkel on early Columbia solo projects. And he didn't have a label, and he worked on this album with Phil Ramone, and the influence came from sort of desert guitar players like Alafarque Torre and others. And he based the rhythms on that. It was kind of written for rhythm guitar. Great songs on here, great songwriting, great lyrics. And I tell you, Paul Simon is one of the few of the elder statesmen that has retained his voice. His vocals are amazing on all his recent solo albums, in my opinion. He has a great sound. He knows how to work the studio. Of course, Phil Ramone is an amazing producer and engineer on this. But also, aside from just doing sort of singer-songwriter, bluesy, folk-type things, he adds samples, adds some vignettes of recordings, sort of mix-type things on here. Opens up with the song Get Ready for Christmas Day, which has this kind of bluesy preacher talking about Christmas Day. It's on a loop. You know, maybe a little like Moby would have done. Moby has done, obviously, on his records. And Paul Simon has always been influenced by various genres. And the albums before this, for a long time, since maybe Rhythm of the Saints and Graceland have been more rhythmic things. And this is a little more song-based, but it has the rhythmic loops, and especially on that song. Dazzling Blue, Rewrite, Love is Eternal, Sacred, Light. Beautiful song. So Beautiful, So What is a gorgeous ending to this wonderful record with this beautiful cover. So Beautiful, So What. I'm thinking this came out around 2011, this vinyl version at least. Not sure exactly on the date, but this is a record that if you see this, the vinyl is sort of rare to get, but even if you want the CD sounds great, and highly recommend this Paul Simon record. Next is Joan Baez, Any Day Now. This is an amazing, just wonderful, expansive album from 1968 that Joan Baez recorded in Nashville. All Nashville studio musicians, a very different take than her folk stylings and early traditional folk songs, some protest songs she sang, all on Vanguard Records early on, parallel with Bob Dylan. Obviously, they crossed paths, they crossed loves. They would play live together. But this is the first Joan Baez album that I ever bought in 1968 when I was 14 years old. I think mainly because it was a double album of all Bob Dylan songs. And this is an amazing sounding record, wonderfully recorded, great musicianship. This is just prior to Dylan doing his Nashville thing. And what I liked about this, because I knew a lot of all these Dylan songs, or most of them at the time. You Ain't Going Nowhere, of course. The Byrds had a version of it, and Dylan would do it, obviously, and release it on his own, too. I believe it was on Dylan's Greatest Hits. But this is a really good album. I mean, you have a who's who of Nashville players of the time. You got Grady Martin, Kenny Buttry, Norbert Putnam, Junior Husky, Pete Drake, Buddy Spitzer, Jerry Reed, Stephen Stills, David Briggs, and it's led by Grady Martin. Amazing sounding record, a great musicianship, and this adds another element to the folk things, because most of the folk albums that Joan Baez had in the early 60s and mid-60s on Vanguard were pretty much her and a guitar with maybe a bass or side that are great records. But this one has balls. This one has a different level. This is more accessible to people who may like her voice and think her records are a little too intimate. I happen to like them. I think this is a really successful record, and it holds up today. Again, it's one of the best sounding, it's a very good sounding record altogether, and one of the best sounding records in my collection. Any Day Now, Joan Baez, 1968, all Dylan songs. So most of the songs, those of you who follow Dylan, I think you'll be pulled in because of those songs. And lastly, I promised you with an archive record, and that's Yardbirds 1968. This is a set put out in 2017. This was put out directly by Jimmy Page. Mostly, I think you had to order it directly from his site, but I think some retailers had it. But it was somewhat limited. It's a slipcase and multi-LP set. Now, it does include Live at the Anderson Theater. This is the final version group of the Yardbirds, and this is that transition period, right as they were slowly evolving, and of course then Jimmy Page would create Led Zeppelin into the end of that year, into the new year. The songs, of course, were all the songs that were the hits at the time. Train Kept A-Rollin', You're a Better Man Than Me, Heart Full of Soul, Dazed and Confused, Over Unders, Sideways Down, White Summer, Shapes of Things, I'm a Man, the Yardbirds. Now, the actual album, that's a slipcase. This is the album cover, really kind of great, sort of mid-century modernist artwork. I love the packaging on this. This is a gatefold record. There's your band. There's your band. No Jeff Beck. There's your band. Then the second LP are studio demos. That's what I like the best. Now, the live album came out for a very short time back in the 70s. I think it was withdrawn after a while in America. So a lot of people who know and follow Led Zeppelin and the Yardbirds have heard these before. But I always hate when I read that. We already have that. put something else out. Well, we don't always hear everything. Not everyone buys bootlegs. I'm hearing that now with Neil Young and Dylan and the Beatles. We already have that stuff. We've heard all that. We've heard it. Not, we all haven't heard it, but this is a great way to package it so we can hear it nicely. You get the tapes, put it out nicely. I think Jimmy Page did a fabulous job on this. The second disc, these demos are great because you really hear that seed of Led Zeppelin on that. In fact, some of the licks, some of the songs, some of the guitar playing on here is right in that stuff that would come out on the first Led Zeppelin record. You just got Spanish Blood, Knowing That I'm Losing You, Tangerine, Taking a Hold on Me, Drinking Muddy Water version 2, Spanish Blood, an instrumental version. Again, maybe not recognizable in terms of the songs, but you know how Jimmy Page and Led Zeppelin would take other music and recreate it and put it out. But I think this is a successful set. And another special part of this is this massive book that comes in this wonderful slipcase. Just the design on it, it's psychedelic, it's modern pop art at its finest. I think it's a really beautiful design. I like this style of very different color palettes over photographs. It just makes for a cool ass take of 1968 music in the band and what was happening then. Yardbirds 68. This came out again in 2017. I believe it came on a CD version as well as a vinyl version. So if you're a fan of this group, if you're a fan of the Yardbirds, if you're a fan of Led Zeppelin, this is sort of the early Led Zeppelin, the end of the Yardbirds, that cross period. Again, it's not Led Zeppelin, but it's the seeds of Led Zeppelin, the influence, the birth of that great band in 1969. So It's the Music Stupid. I think it's number 32 here. Thanks for watching. If you like this, subscribe. And Mazzy loves you.